Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to an instant reaction edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020, and joining me to break down a surprisingly gutsy and heartful effort in round 21 against the Melbourne Storm for our Parramatta Eels is my good mate, Sixties. Big fella, the Eels went down 32-14. I think it's fair to say they went down swinging. I had them pegged as potential big losers tonight, and for their captain's 200th game as an Eel, I think that from 1 to 17, while you can accuse them of playing less than optimal football at times, I don't think you can question the effort. There was a lot of guts on show tonight.
Well, I think in that aspect, mate, I sent a message to a number of people tonight. 9 out of 10 for effort. It might even be close to a 10 out of 10 for effort. 5 out of 10 for execution.
You might be generous there as well on the execution front. They
shot
themselves in the foot multiple times to the tune of 12-point or maybe 10-point, given the way we've been goal kicking turnarounds.
Yeah, I guess I'm given 5 out of 10 because for the most part of the game, the defensive execution wasn't too bad.
No, it wasn't.
You know, considering that there were 2 tries basically handed on a platter, there was a try that was scored where we were a player down with the sin being of Tungor. And there was also a try off an outrageous forward pass.
A bit of NFL being played out there, yeah.
Yeah, and everyone at the stadium saw it except for the match officials. So it was,
it woke them up, though. They found 2 forward passes after that.
Yes, yeah, quite remarkable. But, yeah, look, I mean, the difference, I guess, when it comes down to it, is there was a class difference between the teams. And if we're thinking about what we want from Parramatta between now and the end of the year, where they're going to be, it's going to work out that there'll be 14 players down across this weekend because I don't think Morgan Harper's going to play for New South Wales Cup this weekend. I'll be surprised if he does. But, when it comes down to it, the resources are stretched. Tonight they were playing the team that was
runaway minor premiership favourites.
Yes, and the return. Not only that, they have that particular team having Cam Munster returning to the action. Everything was favouring the Storm except for which ground it was being played at, and we shouldn't be accepting defeats like this, but given what our expectations were of the match, I can't ask too much more of the players, certainly of the majority of them. Disappointed in the performances of a couple of them in terms of execution and, just seeing some of the same mistakes that have, featured all through the season. But people can say, "Oh, this person should be dropped," or "That person should be dropped."
But we're so far beyond that. The troops are not there.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, it is what it is. Before we dive any further into this, John, a shout out first of all to Paraleagues. We were there tonight, talking to the great man Steve Edge, the 3-time premiership winning captain for the Eels in 81, 82, 83. The word legend is thrown around quite a bit, but that man's accomplishments and besides the fact that he's just a champion bloke on top of it, always a really good guest for anyone that has I guess an after dinner speaker or someone to talk rugby league about. He's just, you're not going to get better than Stephen Edge. And Look, it was a really good podcast with him today, mate, even if I do say so ourselves. The people were there for the podcast.
Yeah, great audience, tremendous guest.
Yeah, great audience, tremendous guest. Of course, lots of people wanting to have a photo with Steve afterwards and we pushed
the limits of his availability, didn't we? Because he was on a time crunch to get over to the stadium for his official Eels ambassador responsibilities. But he was so wonderful of his time with both us and our audience. So I mean, you talk about gentlemen, and a lot of that class in the 80s, they are pure class. But among them, you can see why Stephen Edge was hailed as a leader and one of the most popular members of those squads. Free time.
Oh yeah, and we're tacking the podcast on to the end of this instant reaction.
Correct.
So please have a listen, because Steve, we get him to offer some quick comments about the different players that he played with at Parramatta, but he also shared something about Jack Gibson.
Old Gibbo.
And Jack Gibson's generosity.
Yeah, he shared both the funny and the heartwarming stuff about Jack Gibson and his relationship with that playing group, and you can see why Gibson is hailed as one of the greats, if not the great, when it comes to coaching. He was, as you said, 60s, a singularly unique man that marched the beat of his own drums, but you can see why he commanded loyalty in his boys, because he looked after them.
Oh yeah, and when you hear the stories that he shares about him, you understand what we mean. And look, thank you to everyone that did come along today and had a chat with us. And it was a strange sort of day, because it was full of people wanting to talk footy, and there was a good vibe, not only at the club but even after the game, talking to fellow supporters about the match and about footy in general. And everyone's a bit down about Parramatta, but it was odd to walk out after a loss, and people they're not happy, but they weren't angry or upset after tonight. And I guess that a lot of that has to do with the effort that was there. Also, shout out, of course, to Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And it is actually as straightforward as that. So thanks to Greg and the team there. But, John, let's get into tonight's game. What are some of the key stats that caught your eye?
Yeah, Eels going down 32-14, as we mentioned in the lead into this one. Jake Tungall getting the first try in this game. I believe that was your tip, 60s, in our previous podcast. And I said that if we kept the scoreline to within 18, we've done pretty well. So our combined tips, not too far off the mark here this week. But he was followed up by a Sean Russell double. Nearly nabbed a hat-trick on the bell. A little kick ahead that just took the wrong bounce for him. For the Storm, Grant Anderson, Harry Grant, Will Warbrick, Tyron Wishart, and Ryan Pappenhausen, try scorers. Nick Meaney flawless off the tee for the tries. Also attacking on a penalty goal. Jake Tungall spending technically 9 minutes in the sin bin 60s, because that penalty goal on half-time that actually ate into his sin bin outage. Key stats across the team, though. Eels really dominant in possession here. I don't know if it felt like that in this game, but up 55-45% in the splits there. As you'd expect, time of possession in their favour too, plus 5 minutes on that clock. Both teams completing around about 80%, 79 for the Eels, 80 for the Bulldogs, the Storm. Jesus. In terms of key stats, Eels more effective running the ball in basic situations, more runs, better post-contact meters, but Melbourne with more line breaks, 9-5. Tackle breaks pretty close between the two, 31-35 in favour of Melbourne. Play the ball speed around the same, actually, which is kind of a unique thing for the Parramatta Eels. And then in terms of the other important stats, the Melbourne Storm were more efficient defensively, which I think we started to see after that first quarter of play. 60s, we brought great energy and intensity of our line speed, but in that second quarter of play, it felt like Melbourne was starting to find some traction in behind the ruck, and that's why they've been probably about 4 percentage points better than us when it comes to effective tackle rates, 87.34 to 83.38. And then going down to errors, Eels with more errors, +3 in that column, but giving away less penalties and set restarts. So they're the key stats across the two teams. Individual players, as we expect, Clint Gutherson does make a difference if he's 200th game as an Eel or it's his 20th. He gave it everything, 200 metres on the ground. A lot of great involvements there. And then most of the rest of the back line into the triple digits. Blaze, Will, Sean Russell, Dylan Brown. Dylan Brown up at 175 metres, 60. So he was trying his backside off with the ball in hand. And then in the forwards, 3 forwards probably stand out there. Sean Lane, 145 metres, 18 carries, has a line break and a line break assist as well as a try assist to Jake Tungall, although that was offset by some less than disciplined moments for him. And then we had Ryan Madison starting at lock forward, 17 carries, 134 metres. Tough sledding for the middles there. And then off the interchange, Joe Opengahi, 14 carries, 126 metres. Although I thought Luca Moretti was pretty solid in his stint on the field. He was just shy of 100 on the ground. And then the rookie, Dan Keir, late debutant, 8 carries, 74 metres. So well done to Dan. I know there was a coughing up the ball in the red zone, but there was some good defence in there as well. So he had a solid night on debut.
Yeah, shout out to Dan Keir. We couldn't talk about it in the preview podcast after watching the captain's run, but Dan was included in the team basically at the point of time of the captain's run. And we were up there watching it, and I'm doing the number count because I'm seeing Dan Keir out there, and I'm doing a number count, and there's 19 players out there. So I've gone, okay. He and Ethan Sanders is like 18th, 19th men. They're probably just included in the captain's run. And then next thing, Dan Keir's involved in a lot of the plays. And I'm thinking, if I didn't know better, I'd swear he was playing. And then when training was over and they were in the huddle afterwards, and there was no presentation of Dan, and I thought, okay, nah, he's obviously not playing. And then next thing, the huddle breaks up and everyone comes over and they're shaking his hand or giving him a pat on the back or what have you. And then next thing, he's telling a story, which is, I think it's part of
the ritual for making your debut.
Part of the ritual, yeah. The debutant tells a story. And then I'm thinking, no, maybe he is playing. And then I checked with someone as we were going, and it was like, yes, Dan Keir is playing. So I was like, okay, got to keep the trap shut now about this. I think
Wacko's Whispers got the tip about 4 hours ahead of kickoff, or maybe a little bit more. So it was pretty tightly knit there from the Eels, and we actually ran into some of Dan's friends at the end of our show, didn't we, 60s? Yeah, they had the apparel on for Dan's debut, 2024.
Yes, I complimented them on how quickly they
put it together. It was a nice hustle plays from the boys there. And
that's an indication of how quick or how sudden all of this was, because, as I said, there was no presentation to him until match day today, when his father made a speech, and quite magnanimously as well gave a tribute to Gutho as part of that speech, and talked about the inspiration that he is for Dan and the team. So, look, Dan's been with the club now for a number of years. He's been on these. He hasn't been in top 30, but he's been on that fringe of the top 30, and just works his backside off at training. He's one of the hardest workers in pre-season. He's got the pedigree. He's an Australian schoolboys player. He was down at the Raiders and making a name for himself. It just never happened at that time. And then I guess as well, as he was still, battling to keep going, COVID would have affected those, couple of seasons as well if you're not playing in the first grade. So you have to say for those players, and Dan's now one of them, who debut a little bit later in their football career, and I think Dan's about 26, something like that. Geez, you've got to give them credit for just slogging away, and then the rewards come. So he is now, I think, is it player 850?
I believe so. I think Lorenzo was 849, so that would make him 850.
Yep. So he is now, and can always say that he's played NRL.
Nice round number too.
Yep. So congratulations to him. But yes, just back to the game. John, we talked about how strong it was from an effort perspective. And really, like just watching them continually turn up. Melbourne looked like they were going to threaten to score, to break the line all the time. But the scramble in defence, like you were actually seeing some effort on effort for probably the majority of the boys out there. I was a little bit disappointed with a couple of the line breaks that were made in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
But look, for the most part, you have to keep it in perspective about who they were playing and who was missing from the Eels team. And, yeah, just really acknowledge that there was that effort there. And I'll ask you this as well, John. There's a lot of conjecture around Clint Gutherson and what his future is at fullback. But I'll tell you what, he still manages to pull out moments where you go, if we didn't have Gutho there, what would the outcome have been?
The contest for that kick with Will Warbrick, the one
Yep.
that Hughes kicked in short and flat. Yeah, look, the only thing holding Gutho back from fullback will be his own body. The only thing I've ever criticised Quinton for, and I say criticise, it feels like the wrong term, because I suppose if you're talking at it from a purely critical perspective and not being complaining about, the only thing that really ever inhibited his ability at fullback was a lack of elite pace. He is one of the most balanced and self-instructive fullbacks I've seen. Like the amount of effort he has put in to hone his game from defense, where he is probably the best defending fullback in the competition. I know that this year's been a bit rough on him with a couple of missed tackles at the last line, which have been uncharacteristic, but that's been more a function of, I think, of the injuries that he's been battling through, especially that knee. But the only thing he's ever lacked was elite pace. He has been such an incredible servant for this club. And like I said, the only thing that would ever hold him back long-term from playing fullback for the next 3 years would be his own body giving out on him. And maybe that's what we've seen with the indication to, go get an X Factor or make way for Blaze Talangi, because, yeah, you see efforts like he put on tonight and for the vast majority of this season. And he's a player, and I know we talked about this on Tuesday with the whole Jason Riles looking to Mitchell Moses with the captaincy. He's one of those guys that doesn't need the captain, the C next to his name, to be an on-field leader, because he literally does that every week, and we saw it again tonight. He was massive. He put his body on the line multiple times, was heavily involved as a primary ball distributor in this game because of a lack of cohesiveness between RC and Brown, and he was having some nice touches there. And yeah, I mean, you could wax lyrical about him for literally half an hour in this podcast. He is so wholehearted, and 200th game for the Parramatta Eel, and like I said, it could have been his 20th game. You get the same effort. Absolute soldier.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to what wasn't working tonight, we were a bit disjointed in our attack. I mean, it seemed like there were plenty of shifts, but I'm not sure of the purpose of some of them.
Yeah, they were moving the ball for the sake of moving the ball, rather than moving with crisp intent and the ability to ask different looks and different questions of the Melbourne Storm defense.
And I mean, there was obviously a little bit more second phase play in different parts of the game that got our count up to what the Storm was. But, I thought there was points in that, there were times in that second half where I thought we would benefit from just finding an offload to, I mean, it seemed that we were playing either these shifts without great purpose, or we were doing a lot of one-out running without looking for any sort of second phase coming off it. It was almost like the two extremes that were going on there. It just felt disjointed. Like it felt like the players weren't 100% certain about what they should be doing. And we saw at the end for example, with the try that was scored, there was a bit of good heads-up play with Lussick and Cardi to create that opportunity for Sean Russell. And you wonder how often, there was someone that wasn't looking for that during the game, because
there were chances there. Melbourne was sloppy. They were there to be beaten tonight. I know I've said that a few times this year. I'm sort of retreading the same comment, but 100% without a doubt, Melbourne were there to not just be beaten, to have their teeth knocked in. They were playing so sloppy.
Yeah, and you wonder what a difference it would have made if, like, Mitch Moses wasn't out injured. You just feel that if we just had that little bit of extra class in this game, we didn't need to be full strength. We just a couple of extra players that weren't out of action could have made the world of difference. So just a couple of puzzling things. We spoke about this before, but not too many minutes there for Woody.
Yeah. I thought he had a good opening stint as well. Was part of it. You mentioned, he didn't go out and fold someone the way you intimated he might try, but he was playing with good intensity. So I don't know if T-Baz just got that wrong with the interchanges, because it felt like he gave good minutes to a couple of guys off the interchange, in Luca and Dan Keir, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to go check their minutes. Yeah, 34 for Dan, 41 for Luca. Joe getting 37's nothing, surprising. He's a rock solid player. He deserves it. But yeah, felt like maybe they could have rationed out a few of those minutes between Luca, Dan, and gotten Woody back out there, or maybe a bit more in the opening stint. I don't know, or maybe a bit less from Reg, 54 minutes for the big fella. It just felt like Woody got lost there, because I don't think he did much wrong.
Yeah, I actually thought he had put the hurt on someone out there. I'm sure there was a tackle that he made where one of the Storm players struggled. Maybe
Jack Halfin?
Yeah, look, it could have been. It could have been because whoever it was absolutely struggled for the rest of the set. Was bent over for a bit, needing assistance, and then was struggling to get into position. I think that was a Woody tackle that did that. So yeah, that was interesting that he wasn't called on again. And I thought it might have been good to have had him out there when the Storm put out Big Nelson.
Yeah, going
it would have been a bit of the big fellas taking each other on with that. I don't know if there's too much more in the way of analysis from that.
Melbourne scored some really opportunistic tries in the first half. Obviously, it was a 10 or 12 point swing, depending on how you view our goal kicking off that left edge play that went awry. And then Lane just literally handing the ball to Harry Grant, not helping our cause there. Melbourne, they were sloppy. They were lucky. And speaking to Steve Edge, which you guys can listen to after, he talked about in games like this, when you're the underdog, when you're outgunned, the bounce of the ball can be a big deciding factor. We saw that tonight. The Eels could have easily been up 12, 18 points to zip with all the ascendancy. Instead, they went down. They went down at half time, despite Melbourne not having a play inside Parramatta's 20, and despite being the better team for vast waves of that game, or at least the first half. So it was a very frustrating game in the sense that the execution was terrible. The even not even just the execution, but the conceptualization of how they were attacking Melbourne was very bland, or at least with the speed it was being executed, it made it look bland. And then that was contrasted against the effort, where even someone like Sean Lane, who I thought was probably one of the deciding factors negatively in this game, in terms of obviously the try he gave to Harry Grant and a couple other moments, and I think Dejan's probably similar too. But even then, I saw Sean Lane absolutely busting his ass in the final quarter of play, trying to make tackles in support, in cover. So as much as I'm going to, call them out for the first thing, I want to put on the record that I thought that the effort on whole was still very good, and that's what makes losses like this. I suppose you talk about not proud or whatnot, but it makes it so much more palatable because the team busted their asses. And yes, they tripped up and messed up, and there were opportunities to look back and say, man, we had Melbourne, we could have beaten them. But they went out there and actually put their money on the table and went in. So,
John, I think where it hurts is this is not the first time that we've seen games where the Eels have been just about to score a try or really threatening the line. The ball gets, there's some sort of error made. The ball's immediately turned over and the opponents go the length of the field and score. Now, They didn't quite do it. It took another play.
Dylan Brown refused to let him go the length of the field. He did that a couple of times tonight.
Yeah. So, but we're still, it just feels like deja vu. It's so frustrating. I'm glad there are people who, not many people see I won't say the tantrums that I was throwing in the stand tonight, but I was
the wild gesticulations.
there was. I was losing the plot out there watching the balls getting turned over on attack, and you can just feel an error's coming. Like, I don't know why, but you just know at some point in the attack on the line, something's going to go horribly awry. And it's this sort of year where we feel that this is inevitable, or I feel it's inevitable that there's going to be a mistake made and then we're going to be made to pay the price. But when you think about this year, I think the Broncos, from memory, got points on us in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Who else?
Yeah, Broncos had at least 2 tries, almost exactly the same way that Melbourne did. There are quite a few games, I think, if you would go through the tape and see it, which makes it that much more frustrating, doesn't it? I think the Cowboys, even though we beat them, I'm pretty certain the Cowboys had at least a try that was against the run of play. It's definitely happened a few times this season, and it's so frustrating to be, in the box seat, putting the pressure on your opponents, and then suddenly you're the one that's down. And it feels like the reverse never happens too. Like we literally saw tonight, and I don't blame him for it because we're down 12 points at the time, I believe it was. And normally I would just yell at a player, trap the ball and dive on it and secure possession. But we're down 12 points with less than 20 minutes to play. Will Penasini gets the ankle. They throw a bad pass. Will Penasini pushes up to get it. It's at his ankles. Doesn't kick up. He knocks it on. He had 80 minutes to go with no one near him. He scores a try. You contrast that with Jerome Hughes turn the ball back to the short side in the same game. He throws a loose cutout pass back to the short side. It bounces at the feet of, is it Jack Howarth on the right down there? Or whichever centre it was. Intended for the centre, and terrible pass. By all rights, it's going to skew into touch. It bounces up perfect for Will Warbrick to dive over in the corner. Like that's, there's not much you can do about that. And that's happened to Parramatta a fair bit this year.
Yeah. So, we're talking about like a bit of misfortune that happens, but that's what happens if you're sitting at the bottom of the table and things aren't going right, and through your own doing, where you have to look in the mirror for something going wrong. It just seems to compound where luck deserts you, just totally deserts you, and it's not good enough to be relying on luck or the footy gods or what have you, but they have certainly forsaken the Eels.
Oh yeah,
in this season, that's for certain. So, John, we come out of a game like tonight, and we're saying, look, we can't ask for too much more from effort. It is obvious that the players do care about their performance, but in a game like tonight, when execution wasn't happening, you just go, we haven't got the cattle to match the Storm on a night like this. Now, we were saying that anyway in the previews. I'm just happy from the players' perspective that when so many supporters and look, we were two of those. So many supporters thought that it was going to be an absolute landslide.
Biblical, yeah, it was going to be 50 points.
Yeah, and I had people sending me messages saying, I think we're heading for a record walloping here. Like, this could be anything. And maybe, just maybe, they didn't count on the Eels players really caring, really having heart about their performance. And I'm not making, in a year like this, I'm not making that acceptable. I'm not making a loss to the Storm acceptable or anything like that. But I am going to acknowledge that, apart from poor execution, which you're not going to win football games with such poor execution, but, there was some heart, there was some effort that was shown tonight. So, and we'll just acknowledge that. So, mate, I don't know if there's anything more that we need to say. Do you want to give a 3-2-1? Let's give a 3-2-1
Sure.
on an effort night like that. Who's your three?
I mean, you really have to ask that. 200th game as a Parramatta Eel. He's, like I said, led the way every single game. And Gutho was no different tonight. I thought he was tremendous. Was tasked with extra responsibilities due to the lack of Mitchell Moses. And I think maybe Dylan Brown deferred to Dejan Arce a bit too much, which sort of forced Gutherson to step up. But he was tremendous.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. He's the king. And he's the king for a reason. So, you two, mate?
Look, I thought Dylan tried his backside off. There was some sensational cover tackles where he had no right to get to the other side of the field and make them. But there was also some sloppiness that I think probably holds him back in the 2 points here. Same thing, Will Penasini. I thought he played some really good football with a lack of opportunities. Still did a lot of hard work, but there were still some missed tackles down that edge. So I'll keep it simple. I thought the forward that probably had the most impact and was trying the hardest through the most difficult periods was Ryan Madison. So he gets my 2.
Yeah, I still have to give my 2 to Dylan Brown because, like Gutho, I think to myself, what might things have got like without him tonight?
Yeah, I suppose I'm being a little bit harsh, but I felt he deferred too much to Dejan. There was a couple of errant passes, including one to Gutherson. But I don't blame you for giving him 2 points because he was wholehearted in his effort. You talk about that 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10 effort, and he was 100% the player that typified that the most.
Well, I'll give him a 10 out of 10 for effort. I'll give him a 6 to a 7 for execution. The execution did let him down, but like the bloke just was busting his ass all night, and it wasn't working with different aspects of his game. But if you're talking about someone that really looks like they care out there,
Oh yeah,
he's there. And yes, I get what you're saying about deferring to Dejan Arce a bit too much. But that was obviously the game plan that they were going with, and yeah. So you 1 point there, mate.
Yeah, well, I'll give it to Dylan on the back of the very things we talked about. As much as I call him out for those things that I found reason to gripe about, the effort was incredible. Like I said, those cover tackles he was making, Ryan Pappenhausen, that is not a slow person, and he gets in from across the other side of the field. And obviously, he goes on to concede a tackle or a missed tackle a play later because he was so exhausted from running down to the other side of the field to get across back to his side to try and make the tackle. But yeah, Dylan's effort, phenomenal. Even with the deferring to Dejan Arce, there were moments in the second half where Melbourne were barely containing him. He actually broke through at one point. I think he ended up tripping himself. I don't think he got ankle tapped. I think he ended up just tripping himself over when he found Bryce, and then Bryce, just gung-ho flicked the ball out to Gutho and it got turned over. We were chasing a lot of points at that stage, so I understand. But yeah, he is an outstanding footballer, and yes, you just want him to lean into that a little bit more when Moses isn't there. And I think that he sort of lost himself for a bit in that game, but defensively the effort was incredible. And I mean, the effort on the field in terms of running was also phenomenal. 175 metres. The bloke outgained everyone except Gutherson, and he was playing 5'8". So 1 point for Deal.
Well, I was looking at Maddo, but I'm just going to steer away from him just a little bit, and go with another forward. And I'm actually going to give it to, and it might surprise you, Luca Moretti.
No, Luca was good tonight. We've said before on this podcast, he has actually shown legitimate growth this year to be projecting towards being a good contributing NRL player if he cut the errors out. And he's cut those errors out ever since coming back from reserve grade. And he goes out there, he's physical, he's got good post-contact meters, nice footwork before the line. And the other thing too, that it doesn't show up in the stats, but he doesn't mind getting in the face of the opposition. Sofa Solomona came after him at one point in that game in the in goals, I think it was, and he didn't back down. A little bit of fire and brimstone goes a long way when you're struggling. And I'm not saying he's going to be the player that ignites his team or reignites his team, but a bit of starch like that, it doesn't get missed.
Yeah, so I really like what he produced, and he had that bit of a line break.
Yes, he did. Yeah, on the start of the second half, I think it was. We're playing with 12 men. He made the line break.
You just knew that if that was a game where Mitch Moses was on the field, that he would have been the player charging through in support, and who knows what that would have led to there. I also would acknowledge the efforts of Bryce Cartwright too, and I thought very early on Bryce was looking to hurt a bit with his defence, sort of as the way he started the season.
But probably a sign that his ribs finally started to heal, because he hasn't looked to lay the stick into the opposition since that stage, understandably, because that's just literally how you perpetuate the injury in your ribs. But yeah, he went out there for a bit of venom, had some nice touches, obviously engineered that try alongside Joey Lussick for Sean Russell. So a fair shout out there.
Yeah. So, mate, I think that just about brings us to the end of our instant reaction portion of the podcast. Again, thanks to Parramatta Leagues Club for hosting us tonight with the pre-game show, and also to Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta for their continued support. John, well done again, mate, and thank you for your fine work tonight at the club. Again, a thank you to all of those people that came down to watch the show, stuck around for a chat, and Ben and Fletch, you two are legends. And please stick around for this podcast now with Stephen Edge that we recorded at Parramatta Leagues Club before the game. Yeah, you won't be sorry listening to this. The bloke has some great observations, great anecdotes. He's just a terrific fella. So please enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Parramatta Leagues Club, the home of the Eels. We are the Cumberland Throw. We are about all things Parramatta Eels, and we're really pleased to have an extra special guest. Let's say we're diving into champagne territory here, because we are pleased to have a history-making, premiership-winning captain. He captained the Eels to 3 consecutive grand final victories. He's Eels player number 378. He did win a couple of grand finals with the Dragons, but we're not going to mention too much about that. He played 103 games for the Dragons, 118 games for the Eels, 11 grand finals he played in something like 13 seasons across all grades. The only player to captain 2 different teams to a premiership. He played in the hooker position in the very first State of Origin series in 1980, the very first game, I should say. Everyone, please welcome the legend, Stephen Edge.
Where did you get all that information from, Craig?
It's amazing what Google will come up with, mate. But I was around at the time. I am a man in my 60s, so I was there and lived through it, Steve. So
I wish I was a man in my 60s, but I'm not. But anyway, that's the way the Mercedes-Benz. Anyway.
Now, Steve, this is actually your second appearance with the Cumberland Throw. You joined us for a chat way back in 2016, just when we launched. You were kind enough to open up the Cogra dressing sheds for our chat. We had the Crow drive up from Wollongong. Can you believe that we're here talking again all these years later?
Oh, well, you've got a terrific theme that you're running with the mighty Parramatta Eels, and it's not a surprise at all, as a matter of fact. And you're both very intense about it and serious about it. So, mate, I don't think it's unusual. I'm just a bit concerned it took 8 years to get me back.
All right, let's talk about your career just a little bit, Steve. You were graded in 1973. It was a completely different era of rugby league.
Actually, it was 71. But that's okay, yeah.
So
I need to be corrected there.
Yeah, we'll put that one on 60s. It was a completely different era of rugby league, though, and you played in one of the toughest positions in hooker, and one of the most different aspects of the game back then was the scrum. What was it like to pack down in the front row in the 70s?
Well, you needed two really, really good props to be in the front row with you, because invariably if you've got someone like, I don't know, just some of the guys that we used to play against, John O'Neill, I mean, they were frightening guys to play against, so you needed...
Johnny Sattler,
yeah. Yeah, those ones, so that's why you needed two really, really good props. I was lucky enough to have Craig Young and Brucey Starkey there. They were the ones who did all the hard work. I just told them what to do. And then, of course, I had the great Ronnie Hilditch and Bobby O'Reilly here at Parramatta, and they keep the face looking pretty good.
So you're telling me that you were the brains and they were the muscle?
Well, it's a lot better being the brains than the muscle, I'm telling you. But you needed someone to look after you, because you're looking up to all the other props that you've got, and winning the ball in those particular days was very, very important, because if you didn't win the ball, you found it very difficult to win the game.
Steve, I know that back in the day, you would never have cheated in a scrum. But let's talk hypothetical. If you were one of those hookers that were up against you, what's some of the ways, some of the devious methods they would use to win a contested scrum?
Well, I never used any devious methods at all. I just, as the ball came into the scrum, I caught it with my hand and threw it out the back. That's the best way to do it.
Simple and effective.
You just had to do it. I mean, and quite often your halfback was... it was a real team effort, because you're not playing against your mother or whatever. You're playing against really, really good guys that know what they're doing, and so the halfback, the second rowers, all of them, and the front rowers all needed to know what was going to happen, where the ball was coming in, whether it was coming in high, whether it was coming in low, but generally throw it in the second row.
And I was going to say, it wouldn't have been unusual for an opposition front rower to have his hands all over your eyes anyway.
Yeah, but not for long. There weren't too many. Well, there were a number of guys who did the old eye gouge thing, but as I said, if that happened, we basically had a theory: if that type of thing happens, it just explodes.
Yeah.
Everyone comes up, everyone starts throwing, and get it out of the way, because it's just dreadful, and it really is, because they can do some awful damage.
It was a different era, wasn't it?
It was, but there was nowhere near as much. There weren't that many guys that I played however long, I don't know, 13, 14 years or whatever it is. And in that time, there's probably only 2 or 3 guys who I wouldn't really like to see at any other time. I mean, we're all basically in the same game, and we're all really good guys. I mean, you're packing down against guys like, the youngest wouldn't understand this, but Georgie Piggins. And
yes.
George is probably the toughest player that I've ever come up against as a hooker. And, you know, you could do whatever you like with George as far as cheating and that's concerned, except you couldn't pinch his loose head, because if you pinched his loose head, he got the shits. And that. But other than that, George would play it. I have so much time for him. He was a player that just went out there, and if you wanted to put the rough stuff on, he would put it off. But if you didn't want to put the rough stuff on, you just wanted to play it hard and as you could, he'd look after that too. We'd go back to whichever club we were at, because South were pretty close to both Dragons and the Eels. And he'd take me aside and he'd have a little chat to me and give me a few little pointers
Yeah.
to improve my hooking and playing game and that. And you never forget those types of things.
You know, that's quite extraordinary when you think about a rival, you know, taking a young player in an opposing team and giving him tips and advice about how to be better at the craft.
Well, Mick Stevenson was very similar. And probably the hardest hooker ever to play up against was a fellow by the name of Johnny McMartin.
Ah, yes.
And, you know, he was just an outstanding ball winner. He really was.
Do you remember your own percentage of scrum wins?
I think it was about 95. That I packed down in.
Now, it's almost a strange twist of fate reflecting back on it, but your first top grade grand final win came at the expense of the Parramatta Eels. What were your thoughts when Mick Cronin, the Crow, lined up the conversion that could have won the game?
Well, people don't understand. They think that was a very, very difficult kick that he had to kick. It really was. It was only about 5 or 10 metres in from the sideline. It was a very, very tough kick. It had been a very, very tough game, and those things happen. And one thing about grand finals is, in a grand final, you need a little bit of luck to win it, because the sides are normally that close together. Yep. You need the ball to bounce your way.
You know, it was a tough kick. I have a confession. I was up on the hill that day. I closed my eyes.
Well, that's all right. So did I. But I was in the field.
Look, we've often wondered whether Parramatta's history would have changed. Parramatta's history in the 80s would have changed if they had have won in either 76 or 77. Perhaps the club might not have hired Jack Gibson as a coach. I mean, it could have been like a sliding doors moment, one of those grand finals. But you joined the Eels then in 1980, and then Gibbo joined in 1981.
You can't call him Gibbo.
Now we will get to that, but let's save that one for the next question. But how much of a difference did he make to the playing group as individuals and as a team?
Well, Jack's often seen as being a really, really tough coach, and sort of a little bit different to everyone else, and I'd say that's probably pretty correct.
Much to the beat of his own drum?
Well, Jack was the easiest going coach I've ever played under, and I've played under some of the best. I've played under, Johnny Pearce was a good coach. He just a bummer for him that he had to come out in 1980, and Parramatta were just that desperate to win a premiership, because they'd come so close so many times, and I think what happened was the people in charge of Parramatta at that particular stage, they they've just said, well, it's time to bite the bullet. Let's go and get the best coach. And they weren't wrong. They did get the best coach. He's certainly the best coach I've ever played under. He basically would say, all right, here's the rules. Follow them. Just don't break them. And the other thing people don't understand, with Jack, he would often buy one of the third grade kids a little car because they couldn't get to training on time. And he wouldn't tell anyone. No one, and that's right. The other thing he'd do is Sam Miguel Drug Rehabilitation Centre out there at Windsor. The Parramatta footballers have donated their winning bonus, $200 each for that particular game, and they bought this brand new Ford Falcon that is going to be given to the Sam Miguel Drug Rehabilitation Centre to help them out. Right, 13 players by $200 is $2,600. $15,000 is what the Ford Falcon cost. Who do you think put in all the rest of the money and never said anything about it? He was a genuine guy who loved the young players coming through, and he talked to them, and he had Ronnie Massey. He always surrounded himself with good people, and like Ronnie Massey, who was his right hand man, and the players. Some of the players felt a lot easier to go to Ron than to go to Jack, because Jack was Jack, but if he liked you, I'm telling you, he really, really liked you, and he loved the players.
It sounds like a great time to have been a player there at the club.
It was.
And
it was.
And I'll touch on that shortly, but Craig...
Three premierships, and we had 4 grand finals. We should have won the 4th one too, except those Canterbury blokes got in the way. The Mortimers and the Hughes brothers.
Craig teased it, but we spoke to John Muggleton recently, and he shared a terrific Gibbo or Mr. Gibson anecdote about the time that Jack told him that a stray dog had the tie-breaking vote about his retention in the team after a bit of rough form. We've heard you speak, or had the pleasure of hearing you speak, about your first interaction with Jack Gibson at the Eels. Can you retell it for our listeners today?
Well, Jack was a very, very unique coach. I think the story that you're talking about is Gibbo, and the first introduction, we had a big get-together with all of the players and the officials, and as I said, the Parramatta Leagues Club was totally behind the Eels, which is fantastic. And unbeknownst to me, I came up with Crow. I was actually holidaying down at Gerringong, and we just hopped in the car and came up here, and we had a good we had a good chat, and I'm there and I'm just enjoying myself, and I'm saying Gibbo this and Gibbo that, and we'll do our best, Gibbo. And he said, you keep calling me Gibbo and you won't be playing here. and what happened was there was a lot of noise in the club at the time, because we were in a special part of the club, and the whole club just went silent. Just the whole, and everyone just sort of looked, and I said, certainly, Mr. Gibson. and then he said, you can call me the coach, you can call me Jack, but you don't call me Gibbo. And that's exactly what it was, and no one ever called him Gibbo after that. Not even you. Johnny, not even you.
And look, we're talking about Jack Gibson, and between both him and then yourself, there are a few people as well credentialed when it comes to talking about what it takes to win a premiership. And obviously we can't talk to Gibson anymore, so I want to ask you, outside of the obvious thing, which is just playing talent, and you already mentioned luck on the day, what does it take to win a premiership? Because you did it both at Parramatta and obviously before you joined the club, and we know it's not easy, we know it takes luck. What else, other intangibles maybe, does it take to win the big one?
Well, consistency is what you need. You need to win your games. You need to basically make as few mistakes as you possibly can in the big games. You need to treat the actual big game just like any other game throughout, and that's the most difficult
tough.
thing to do.
That's been a stumbling point for a lot of teams, hasn't it?
But that's exactly what you've got to do. I remember Jack he'd wander in and he'd sit down, and he didn't generally do big, massive discussions about that, because that's all been done throughout the week. We knew what we needed to do to win the game, and then he'd just go around to each of the different players and have a personal chat to them. And then his big thing before the game is, it's just like this, boys. Remember what got you here. Play your best out there, and you will, because that's what's going to happen. It's just like any other game. Just got to get out there and you got to play it. And the best thing you can do is don't make any mistakes. So,
sage advice.
Yeah, and he didn't. It'd be just like me talking to you right now, or Craig. Oh no, perhaps you. But that's what it was like. I mean, if there were so many, if any of the players who had a bit of an issue or whatever, and especially in, I suppose the other thing I should say is different players have different manners of handling the pressure. So you'd have someone like Paulie Taylor and Brett Kenny. They'd be on one side of the thing, they'd be having a laugh and they'd have a cackle and they'd be telling jokes and stuff like that. Then you'd have the hooker, he's on the other side, he's just sitting down, he's just going ding, 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 just going through every play that you've got to see happen and what you've got to do to make sure that you win the game. And that's, but come running out onto the field, basically it just got down to the handshake to everyone, and then there was no fun and games then. Everything just went quiet and you just walked out onto the field. And then once the game kicked off, you could run into automatic and you just start, because you've got to forget. And the other thing he used to always say, he said, just remember what got you here. Yeah. Just think of the good times, what got you here. He said, and you'll be fine. Off you go. It's no different.
Now, Steve, we want to talk about some of the legend players that you play with, so we're going to throw some names at you. And you just give us a quick comment on them, or maybe an anecdote that you might want to share. But we'll go through this nice and quickly. Let's start off with Wally, Peter Wynn.
Peter Wynn? No, I can't say anything about winning. No, he's a champion, mate. He's one of the nicest guys of all time. He's done so well with his Peter Wynn score, and he provides so much stuff for charities and the like. Great player.
The Bear, Bob O'Reilly.
The Bear, he was one that kept my good looks because he was in the front row, and he used to scare the crap out of some of the other guys, so that was good. They decided not to take me on because they knew they'd be taking him on. Ronnie Hilditch would be the other side.
Now, we're about to ask you about Mick Cronin. Before we do, we just share with you that the other week David Lydiard was our guest, and he said that he rang the Crow recently and finally confessed to him that he'd had a man crush on him for all these years, all these decades. He really had a thing for Mick, and Mick's reply was, well, that's nice, but if you don't mind, keep that to yourself.
Yeah, I would too.
So your thoughts on the Crow?
Oh, mate, Goody Two Shoes Cronin, mate. That's his nickname. That's what he is. Unbelievable.
Eric Groth, the Guru.
The Guru. Ask Graham Eady. Guru ran straight over the top of him in, I think it was either the 82 or 83 grand finals. And no one does that to Graham Eady.
No one did that. Absolutely. Brett Kenny.
Bert.
Yeah.
Bert. Love cracking jokes. Brett probably one of the best things I saw is we were playing Newtown in the grand final, and he threw a dummy to the crowd. and
I fell for it.
And he kept going, scored straight away, which is a try we needed as well.
Yep.
But he's one of the freakish players of all time.
Yeah, he was. So many players rate him as just the best that they've played alongside or against.
Wally Lewis is one of them.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Wally
says a lot,
Lewis,
doesn't it?
Wally Lewis, when he went and played over in England in the Kangaroos, he expected to be second behind Brett Kenny.
The player's player kind of sort of talent, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, outstanding.
Yep.
And I don't like playing Wally in
And then what about
Wally Lewis in Origin games. That's not good.
So we go from the natural to his partner in crime, Peter Sterling.
Yeah, Sterlo. Yeah, he used to brush his hair. And he was just a natural.
Yeah.
Honestly, he was a natural.
And
He could read a game.
and then Mr. Perpetual Motion in the back of the scrum, Ray Price.
And
Pricey,
the inspiration for the name of our
The
our
Cumberland
website,
Throw,
the
yeah.
Cumberland Throw.
The Cumberland Throw. Yeah, well, I mean, Pricey's as tough as they come. I remember seeing him play a bit of rugby union.
Did he cop much stick about being a dual code player?
Well, I played rugby union at school, so no, not from me. No, I mean, I used to love
And then one of the
playing
friends
both games. They're both great games to play.
Yeah. One
But,
of the-
but I'm a league fan. That's
No, I understand.
the other one was a hobby.
And one of the friends of the Fro, Steve Ella, Zip.
The Zip Man,
Yep.
mate. If you need any coffee, you ring up the Zip Man, because that's what he does now. He sells coffee, and he's good. I remember with Steve Ella, I arrived here in 1980, and every player who was playing first grade were telling me how there is this outstanding player who's out for the year, and he'll be back in 1981, and he's one of the best ever.
And they weren't wrong.
And they weren't wrong.
No. And then I suppose we'll finish off with one of the titans of the game, Artie Beetson.
Artie, you don't play Origin against Artie, because you're reading the book about how he belted Goody Shoe Shoe's Croner. Well, if you actually read his book, in the foreword, the first bloke he hit was me, because it was a scrum, and that was sort of part of Tommy Rodonicus.
Yep.
You know, 'cause Tommy was supposed to put the ball in the scrum, but he didn't. He just dropped it, and he hit the other opposition a half back, and off we went. And then it was all hell broke loose, and so yeah, no. But I mean, Arthur's a freak. I mean, I played against Arthur, and to just tell you a story, I suppose it's in 1975 grand final. We got beat, and I remember coming in. Three of us took Arthur Beetson down in a tackle, and we all got up and thought, how good's that, you know? And then we saw Russell Fairfax putting the ball down under the post, and
Slipped the off-line
that's
away.
how good he was.
Yeah.
And let's finish the run of players with a bloke who was a bit of a villain as far as Parramatta were concerned, but he ended up coming on board as a part of the staff during Brian Smith's era, and that's Rod Reddy.
Rocket.
The Rocket, that's it, yeah.
Yep. You're better off knowing him off the football field than with him, unless he's on your side. But Rocket was tough, very, very tough. He played, as far as the rules, they were a lot easier to play under in those particular days. But there's one thing about Rocket, and he taught that to the players here too, is he wouldn't go hiding. He wouldn't belt someone and then just go hiding. He was as tough as he could be. He's like Pricey. Pricey was the same. If he belted someone, it was face to face, and then, you know, whatever happens, happens.
You know, when I look back at some of the vision of the games back then, and you'd see something would happen a little bit in a tackle or what have you, the player who copped it, they wouldn't be rolling around on the ground or remonstrating or what have you. You just see him get up, have a look at who it was, figured they'd put it in the memory bank, and when the time was right, maybe exact a little bit of revenge. Was that pretty much how it was back then?
Well, I never used to get near the ball. I found that very, very, very important. But look, it was a very tough game in those days. I had to play with someone like Graham Langlands and Billy Smith, and then we talk about that great Parramatta side that we had in those 3 or 4 years. Sterlo and Kenny, and you know, I mean, Stevie Sharp. I mean, he never sort of got the accolades that he deserved, but that's what sort of in those days. Things like that happened, but it was left on the field. There was nothing happened off the field. In the, I don't know, the 14 years that I was playing, there would only be, say, 2 or 3 people that I would rather not ever meet off a football field because I don't like them. The rest of them, the Mortimer brothers, the Hughes brothers, I mean, the South guys, all of the South guys, you know, yeah, Ronnie Coots and all, mate, we're all in the same game, and we all love the game.
It typifies the spirit of the game,
Brett
doesn't
Kenny,
it?
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's a bit of conjecture around at the moment, Steve, still reflecting back on then, but about who the next immortal is going to be. As far as I'm concerned, and John feels very much the same as me, you can't have the next immortal and not be talking seriously about a Parramatta player from that early 80s era. What do you think, people? Shouldn't there be a Parramatta player in amongst the immortals? So, Steve, what's your attitude towards it?
Well, they're probably, that particular era, probably as strong as you can't go out and pick how, when, where and why, but there's no way in the world that out of that particular side that there wasn't one of the best footballers of all time that would fit into that category. As a matter of fact, I reckon I could name 4 or 5 of them that
that's what we said.
Would deserve
exactly.
being there. They really would.
And that's not being disrespectful to other people who are in the conversation or people who are already immortals, but you just...
I think you'd find if it was being picked by former players,
it might be a bit different.
They'd stand up,
Stand
up, yeah.
Okay, so we move on from immortals to another iconic part of the game in State of Origin. And let's talk about your time there, because you played in the one that established the legend, the very first game up at the Cauldron. That was Lang Park back in those days. What was that experience like for you? You already mentioned Artie Beats and Origin, but I mean, it is such a special part of the game now.
It's wonderful. I mean, I remember, you know, people in the newspapers were talking about how it's going to be a joke. There were three reasons why I knew it wasn't going to be the joke. Number one, you pull on a Blues jumper or a Queensland jumper and you're representing your state, you're going to do everything you possibly can to represent it in a good manner. Number two, you're playing against your mates, and if they get over the top of you, you're going to live with that for the rest of your life.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's, you know, like 40 years later, oh, what about the time we, yeah.
Or a Tuesday night training the next week, especially.
Exactly, all of that time. And the third thing, we had the skipper, who was Tommy Rodonigus, and
He was never going to let you go easy.
And it was never going to be.
Yeah.
I remember.
He was a shrinking violet, Tommy, wasn't he?
Oh, was he ever? As I said, I remember the first time he dropped. We packed down the scrum, and he dropped the ball, and he just belted Oliphant, and all hell just broke loose. The whole place just went berserk. But people started throwing full cans of 4X beer on us, and it was just terrific. But you'd never forget it. And what that game did, it set the scene for what Origin is today, because it's probably the fastest game I've ever played in, and none of that has changed. You have a look at, and I must say, this particular era is probably the toughest I think I've seen. It was brutal, but absolutely unbelievably good. And
well,
it
John
was good
and
the Blues got there, mate.
Yeah, well,
They were
John
good.
and
They deserved it. I mean, the first game that people don't understand is the moment our guy got sent off, Surley?
Yeah, Joseph Suwali.
Suwali, he got. He's one of the nicest kids I have ever met. We, what Maguire did prior to the first game is there's a Blues dinner in at the Star Casino. So what he did, he before the dinner happened, he put a pre-dinner dinner on, where if you played for New South Wales, you came and you met all of the players who were playing there. And not only did you do that, you could bring your wife along or whatever. And they flew Roy Masters up from Melbourne. And they did this tribute to Stevie Mortimer. Because in 1985, Stevie Mortimer won the first Blues series. And they had all this footage of him. And not only him, he was a captain and all that. But it was... And what it did, it was just wonderful, because, I mean, at big dinners and that, you don't get a chance to go around to see all of the other players that are in the... so that was really, really good. But the theme was, this is what they did in 1985, boys. It's now 2024. You guys have got to do the same. This is what they did. This is what they did. And that is... and it was just... It was wonderful. You got a chance to chat to them. They got a chance to chat with some of the Blues players who hadn't played, Blues players who played Origin before. And, mate, it was just terrific. And that's what I think Maguire set the whole thing up on. It says, have a look at this. This is what they did. You guys, this is your chance. You can do that. And it was just unfortunate that in the first game, Suwali got sent off, and once 12's against 13 in Origin, you're gone.
Yeah.
You just can't, because, as I said, it's the fastest game of rugby league that you would play. It certainly was for me. And then, of course, they came out, and in Sydney, absolute whitewash. And then game 3 was just ultra brutal, and took a while for us to get on top, both sides. See, I mean, that's what I'm saying about Queenslanders and so. If you're playing in your Blues and they're playing in maroon, I tell you, it's on.
Yeah,
it's on.
Well, we were actually probably in recent years not quite as invested in the game in Origin as we had been in past years. But I tell you what, this series and that last game. I was actually yelling at the television in that last game, and I haven't done that with Origin football. I do it all the time with Parramatta, but I haven't done it with Origin football for a long time.
Yeah, well, it was one of the best series I've ever seen. One of the best football games I've ever seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've been a wonderful guest, Steve. Let's wrap it up with a little bit of talk about Parramatta tonight. And it's been a tough year for the Parramatta Eels, we know that. And you know that from your association as an administrator of some tough times as well. So you can give us a bit of insight here. It's probably not like what you've seen, though, because Parramatta have about half their players unavailable right now. It's roughly 13 or 14 players on the sideline across both NRL and New South Wales Cup. Given how undermanned the Eels are, and they're taking on the form team, the competition, the Storm, what can they do tonight to be competitive? What would you be telling the team? I mean, you spoke about what it takes to win a grand final.
I'll be just telling what Jack Gibson would be saying.
Yep.
Okay, mate, it doesn't matter what you've done before.
Yep.
It's what you do tonight. And no matter how good the other team is, you've got to respect them.
Yep.
You know. But they've got to produce their form tonight as well. So that's what you've got to do. You've just got to get out there and do your best. And oddly enough, every so often the ball might start bouncing your way, and just take those opportunities.
Yeah.
And you can't be on top all the time, mate. It's just.
We understand
It's just
that.
a tough.
Yep.
It's just a tough gig, and when you start getting all your injuries and Mitchell Moses.
Yep.
Michael Mosley. Yeah. Mitchell. Identical players. But Mitchell, I mean, he was such a big part of games 2 and 3.
Yeah.
I mean, he really was.
He elevated himself to a special level in Origin, and it's a big loss for the Eels.
And he directs the play.
Yep.
You know, and that's what you need. Sterlo, he used to direct the play. You know.
Turvey, yep.
Yeah. So, mate, just do your best. I mean, there's nothing else you can do.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our pre-game appearance. Steve, first of all, thank you. Steve might be available for a very short period of time if people want to come and say good day, have a photo. Thank you to Parramatta Leagues Club for hosting us here. As always, we are the Cumberland Throw. Everyone, thank you very much for being here, and please thank Stephen Edge.
Thanks for having me.